Hi. So, have you ever wondered if it's okay to use references? A lot of people believe in this myth of if you study from real life, you are ruining your imagination, and therefore you're not going to be as good as someone who is not studying from real life and is only drawing from imagination. Well, that is a myth. When we start drawing from the very beginning, we're not really drawing things the way they look like, or most things. We draw them the way we think they look like. Perfect example could be a face. When you only start drawing faces, you've never observed a face, you've never really studied it, you don't maybe even know how to draw it, where to start. You're really drawing it the way you think it looks like, but it really doesn't look that way. That's where drawing from real life becomes incredibly helpful, because in order to be able to draw something from your imagination really well, you need to study it first. You can't really draw a car, a detailed car. You can't really draw that accurately without ever really studying it. You can't really draw things from your imagination the way they look like, or in some kind of interesting way, if you've never really sat down and actually paid really close attention to all the things that make up the thing. So, why is it okay to use references? Well, they help us sharpen our skills. All professionals use references. They help us improve in general and understand how things look like, how they really look like. Not how we think they look like, but how they actually look like. They help us build our visual library. Once you study something, of course, considering the fact that you actually understand what you're looking at, not just copying piece by piece. I'm gonna talk about it in a second. You actually, once you study it and you draw it, you already know how to draw it. You already are expanding your visual library. You kind of, for example, if you draw a particular garment and you really focus on, let's say, the details of that garment, and you know what elements you are looking at, for example, perspective, form, etc. Once you finish the study, you already know how it looks like. You would be able to draw something similar or even exactly the same thing again in the future. So that is how you are able to draw from imagination, as I said before, that you study something from real life first, and then you implement all these things together when drawing from imagination. And even when you draw from imagination, you still could and very often should use references, because you don't know how everything looks like. So that's why you use references, to analyze them. And once you analyze them, you implement the elements that you've looked for, you build your visual library, and you make your paintings look way better, because there's always something in a painting that could be improved with a reference. So, in order to use the reference as effectively, we should know the purpose of actually having that reference. We should know what we need that reference for specifically, because knowing why we're looking for that reference in the first place is going to help us actually find the perfect reference or the right reference. Because, for example, if we're trying to study a structure of a face, probably finding portraits with flat lighting, probably finding portraits with flat lighting is not going to help us very much, especially if you're starting out. You're not going to see the planes at all. And also, not every reference, depending on why you're using it, of course, is going to be fitting for every artist. Probably a professional or an artist that has more experience is, let's say, going to use one reference, but a complete beginner probably won't use that reference because it might be too difficult for him. There might be many more elements that might be actually distracting him from what he's trying to learn. You should always look up, kind of, depending on your level and why you are actually looking for that reference, what do you need it for, what are the criteria, what you should avoid, what you should look for in that reference, maybe where to find them, so that you can actually not waste time, using the wrong references or making it too hard for yourself when you could actually find a better reference fitting more for you. Purpose number 1, for study purposes only, just normal studies, trying to sharpen your skills, trying to learn something, learn the fundamental, maybe, let's say, perspective, that could be done from real life, from photos. You could do master studies. Talking about master studies, you could do style studies. Then purpose number 2, you could use references as inspiration, meaning you don't really pick any of these references and analyze them. You maybe can put them on a board. It's just going to serve as inspiration. Then number 3 is for a project. It's kind of a mix of pure studies and maybe the inspiration references. But the difference is that in pure studies, you study purely to learn. There's no other intention than that with that particular reference. But when you're working on a project, whenever you study something, the intention is obviously to improve that project, to implement it into, let's say, an illustration, painting, whatever, character design. So you could have a pure study of an apple, let's say, how the lighting works on it. But if you're working on a project, if you study that apple, you can maybe study it because the character that you're designing is going to hold an apple in his hands, and you want to know how would it look like. So then, how to use references, because that is important as well. That is kind of determined by its purpose a bit too. But the general advice that I would give you is you have to understand what you're looking at. Ways of using references could be by tracing for study purposes, then making studies like next to the original reference. With tracing, you could really kind of combine it, studying an object next to the reference, because you can maybe break down the planes, let's say, of a portrait of a face by tracing, because it's going to be way easier and faster and probably more effective when you don't really know the planes yet, to trace it. And then once you trace it, you have it on the reference. Next to it, you're going to try drawing it one more time, looking at the photo with the tracing, maybe with the layer opacity maybe a bit lower, so that it doesn't actually distract you or anything. And then inspiration only, that is quite obvious. I don't really know how to explain that really because there's maybe something in a reference that just sparks your creativity, so there's not really much explaining to do about that. Then it's really important to choose the right reference. In different scenarios, you're going to need different references. The general kind of advice would be to look for references with stronger lighting in general, because they're more interesting. They're more visually interesting, and the shapes are also more clear and interesting. especially for studies. Then try choosing references with clear shapes and with clearer rhythms. Especially if you want to draw a figure in a really dynamic pose or maybe even moving, choose a reference that really has nice gesture to it. Just because when you're maybe studying your reference for an illustration or just like that, and you're maybe looking for a gesture and your drawings look stiff, don't always blame yourself for the drawings looking stiff, because a lot of references are just stiff poses. And unless you try to exaggerate it somehow and actually make something of it, but then it won't look like the reference really that much, or it's just gonna look different. A lot of references are just stiff. If you were to only really just study the pose, you wouldn't get any satisfying results. Not every reference has a nice gesture to it, so watch out for that. And also try looking for references with maybe a bigger variety of angles and gesture as well. Because if you're going to, even for an illustration or just when doing a pure study, if you're going to study a human figure standing stiffly like this, just like straight, not really moving anywhere, or even when it has a gesture to it, but it's going to be like all in one angle, it's probably going to be a bit boring. It can be a bit boring, so variety is always nice. And if you're studying, variety is going to help you understand maybe how the forms move in perspective, because it's going to force you not to draw everything like in one line. It's actually going to force you to really think about how it turns in space and how to connect it and all that stuff, so it's going to help you improve a lot. And as I mentioned before, stay away from flat lighting. Most of the times, especially for pure studies, flat lighting is the devil, okay? So I'm not saying you cannot ever use references with flat lighting. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a lot of information is just gone with the flat lighting. There's not really that much to get from it, especially in pure studies. And then also there's some super, super important information to remember. Really important. Number 1, don't copy. Incredibly important. Looking isn't always seeing. Copying is basically that kind of chicken scratching thing very often, where you just try to copy line by line, or try drawing the outline of something, or you're copying an image like little piece by piece. That's when you're copying, and it's not going to help you at all. First of all, it takes pretty a lot of time, especially if you're copying like a shaded portrait. It's going to take a lot of time to copy it. I would say just way more time than if you actually didn't copy. Second of all, it's not going to look as good because, well, if you're really trained at copying, it is going to look really good, probably. But if you don't understand anything underneath that, if you don't understand the fundamentals and what to look for, there's always going to be these mistakes that you just wouldn't make if you understood what you're looking at. Number 2, have an organized folder for your references. You really should start organizing your references really soon because in a year, if you're just collecting references every day for pure studies, projects, whatever, and you don't have them organized and they're just kind of all in this one big folder and there's like 5,000 pictures, oh god, you're never going to get through all of them. It's like I'm not saying it's useless material, but if you're going to want to find that one reference that you know you have in that folder, it's going to be probably really hard to find it. Number 3, just understand what you're looking at. Study the fundamentals, perspective, structure, form, lighting, color, composition, gesture. Actually study these subjects so that whenever you look at a reference, you don't have to mindlessly copy, line by line, chicken scratch your way to the final results, so they could actually look at something, break it down real quick, and then do whatever you want with it. That's way more flexible and more practical than copying mindlessly. Number 3, take your own references. Taking your own references has a lot of advantages. Number 1, you're kind of going to start creating your own style, because just generally everybody likes different things, everybody finds different things interesting, beautiful. So whenever you take a photo of something that you find interesting, you're kind of working on your own style, because you're kind of seeing the world through your own lens. And once you use that reference for your paintings, you're kind of putting all together, the things that you specifically like about the world and what really attracts you, and then using it in your illustration. And number 2, it's your own. You own it. It's yours. So you don't have to be stressed about copyright. Number 4, try the sandwich method, which is basically that you either start with a reference at the beginning of a project, and then you implement something of your own. For example, you put together a pose from many references, let's say, and then in the middle of it, you maybe create your own color scheme. You draw a dress from imagination, the room decoration from imagination, kind of draw it, and then at the end, you maybe correct little things that are not accurate or that you just don't like with a reference. You're going to find a reference, for example, for that dress. You don't like kind of the texture of it, so you find how that specific textile that you want to draw looks like. You're going to study the texture, you're going to implement it, and you're done. Or the other way around, that you're going to start with just an idea, a composition or a figure or a portrait, anything, expression, whatever that makes you want to draw that illustration. Then in the middle, you use references, meaning, maybe pick references for that specific kind of, for the color combinations, color scheme, composition, value, notan, anything. And then at the end, again, you don't use our references, you just draw from imagination. You're done. But of course, you don't have to stick to any specific methods. You should try different things, but you should always find what works best for you and then stick to it. Don't let anybody tell you how you should work, because everybody's different, and what works for someone else might not work for you. Number 5, don't overdo it. You don't have to use a reference for every single aspect of an image. You don't have to have 500 references for that one little illustration. You don't have to. Once you're really sure that you found references or a reference that really kind of resonates with your idea, you don't have to look for 100 more references once you already have that one reference that you just know now that is perfect, okay? Don't stress over not having enough references. There's only enough references once you know that they kind of fulfill your needs, okay? You don't have to have many references just to have many references. So use your intuition and don't let references overwhelm you. Number 6, maybe try using not only images as references, but maybe a poem, a story, an event that that happened in your life, maybe a joke, anything, be creative with it. Not only an image can be a reference. Of course, you're probably not going to study a story, or you're probably not going to make a pure study from a story, but it can serve as an inspiration, and it's going to just help you kind of look at references from a different angle, It's just going to make it more refreshing, the whole process. Number 7, edit your references for your needs if you need to. So if you feel like the reference that you found is kind of good, but the final, maybe the color scheme of that reference is not maybe as contrasting as you would like to in your illustration, and you kind of have troubles, with establishing the correct color scheme yourself, you can edit it. Number 8, remember, nothing is completely original. This could be another myth, that when you use references or study from real life, you will never be original. That is not true, because in a sense, nothing is completely original. I mean, we all live in the same world, okay? And originality kicks in when you combine something in an interesting way, or when you put something that is kind of yours into that thing, or when you might be drawing the same thing as someone else, but you're just seeing the world differently. Everybody sees it a bit differently, so it already is going to be original, Nothing is original in a sense that you're going to draw a pot that nobody's ever seen before, like just an unimaginable object. You're probably not going to do that. But you can draw, let's say, an apple, but in a way that nobody's ever drawn it. Yes, have many people drawn an apple before? Oh yeah, a lot. But doesn't mean that you cannot be original with drawing an apple. No, you can be very original. So, see where I'm going with this? And another thing, you can't really be original or create your own style effectively if you don't observe the world, if you don't actually study things and observe them. Observing helps to find your style as well, not only to understand how things work, but to kind of see the things in the way that you see them only. If that makes sense. And number 9, you don't always have to use a reference. Especially if you're creating a personal illustration. You don't always have to use references, okay? If you feel like you don't need it, like it's actually looking the way, if it really looks the way you wanted it to look like, and you kind of understand how to draw the stuff that you need and that you're drawing, don't feel pushed to use a reference all the time. You don't have to, okay? So that would be it for using references. And I hope that you will not be afraid to use references or feel like it's going to make you less original, or like you're going to lose your imagination. Masters have been using references for not even centuries, like always. The artists that you love are using and were using references. So don't feel ashamed, don't feel afraid. It's a completely normal thing. I know that if you have never been using a reference, or you've been kind of staying away from it, it might feel really strange and really hard to use a reference at first, especially studying something with a reference at first, but with practice it's going to get easier, and then eventually it will feel completely natural for you to use a reference. So I hope this video was helpful, and see you later. Bye.